The past has passed. The future is yet to come. Only the present is in your hands. When you live fully in the present, you transform not only your relationships, but your very soul. Why do you cling to what has passed? In the tranquil forest of Jetavana, where the sunlight danced gently through the leaves, a young disciple named Ananda approached the Buddha. His face was shadowed by sorrow, his shoulders heavy as if burdened by invisible weights. The Buddha sat beneath the Bodhi tree, his figure serene and unmoving, as though he were the still center of the universe. Sensing Ananda's unease, he gestured for him to sit. "Ananda," the Buddha said softly, "what troubles your heart today?" Ananda hesitated, his hands trembling slightly as they rested on his lap. "Master," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, "I am tormented by my past. I have made mistakes I cannot undo. I have spoken words I cannot take back, and I have failed those I love. These memories haunt me. They cling to my mind like thorns, piercing me whenever I try to move forward." The Buddha closed his eyes briefly, as if feeling the weight of Ananda's sorrow. When he opened them, they were filled with compassion. "Come with me, Ananda," the Buddha said, rising gracefully. Together, they walked through the forest, their footsteps light on the earth. Birds sang melodies of the present. The wind whispered through the trees. The world seemed to breathe in harmony. Soon, they came to a clear stream, its waters shimmering under the sun. "Do you see this stream, Ananda?" the Buddha asked. "Yes, Master," Ananda replied, his voice uncertain. The Buddha knelt by the stream, cupping his hands to gather the water. As it trickled through his fingers, he said, "This water flows endlessly, never staying in one place. Tell me, Ananda, can you touch the same water twice?" Ananda shook his head. "No, Master. The water flows, and once it passes, it is gone forever." The Buddha stood, letting the last drops of water fall. "Your past, Ananda, is like this stream. It has flowed away, beyond your reach, yet you hold on to it, as though clinging to the water in your hands will quench your thirst." Ananda lowered his gaze, the weight of his regrets still pressing upon him. "But Master," he said, "how do I let go of what has already pierced my heart? The memories do not leave me." The Buddha gestured to a nearby tree. Its branches stretch wide, some heavy with fruit, while others are bare. "Do you see this tree, Ananda? It bears its fruit without holding on to the blossoms that came before. When the blossoms fall, they nourish the earth, becoming part of the cycle of life. If the tree clung to its blossoms, refusing to let them go, would it bear fruit?" "No, Master," Ananda replied. "Then why do you cling to what no longer serves you?" The Buddha asked, his voice gentle but firm. "Your past is like those fallen blossoms. It has nourished your journey, but it no longer belongs to you. Holding on to it only prevents you from bearing the fruit of this moment." Ananda's eyes filled with tears, but he remained silent, his thoughts churning. As they walked further, the Buddha pointed to the sky, where clouds drifted lazily. "Ananda, what do you see above us?" "Clouds, Master," Ananda replied. The Buddha nodded. "The clouds move freely, shaped by the wind. They do not know where they will go, yet they do not resist. Your future is like those clouds, unpredictable, shaped by your actions now. Worrying about it only robs you of the strength you need to act in this moment." Ananda stopped walking, his voice trembling as he spoke. "But Master, how do I act in this moment, when the thorns of my past and the storms of my future surround me?" The Buddha turned to face him fully. "You must still your mind, Ananda. When the water in a jar is shaken, it becomes cloudy, and we cannot see clearly. But if you let it settle, the water becomes clear, and its true nature is revealed." Ananda looked at the Buddha, his expression a mixture of curiosity and doubt. "How do I let it settle, Master?" "Sit with me," the Buddha said. They found a quiet spot by the stream, the sound of water flowing providing a soothing backdrop. The Buddha instructed Ananda to close his eyes and focus on his breath. "Breathe in," the Buddha said, his voice steady and calming. Feel the air as it fills your lungs, cool and refreshing. Breathe out, letting go of all that weighs you down. With each breath, remind yourself that you are here, in this moment, not in the past, not in the future, but here. As Ananda followed the Buddha's guidance, he felt a shift within himself. The memories of his mistakes still lingered, but they no longer felt like chains. The fears of the future still loomed, but they no longer consumed him. When he opened his eyes, the forest seemed brighter, the stream clearer. He turned to the Buddha, his voice steady for the first time. "Master, I feel lighter. The thorns are still there, but they no longer pierce me." The Buddha smiled. "That is the nature of mindfulness, Ananda. It does not erase your past or guarantee your future, but it frees you to live fully in the present. And in the present, you have the power to heal, to act, and to grow." Closing message. Time flows like a river, always forward, never back. Do not waste your present clinging to what is gone or fearing what is to come. In the present lies the power to heal, to act, and to find peace. The wisdom of letting go. Clinging to what is impermanent leads only to suffering. Let go and find peace in the flow of life. The heavy sack. In a quiet village near the Himalayas, a weary traveler arrived at a monastery. The sun had begun to set, painting the sky with hues of gold and crimson. The traveler, carrying a large sack on his back, staggered toward the gates of the monastery, his face lined with exhaustion. The Buddha, who was staying at the monastery during his travels, saw the man from a distance. As the traveler entered the courtyard, he collapsed onto a bench, letting out a heavy sigh. The Buddha approached him, his presence calm and gentle. "You seem tired, my friend," the Buddha said. "What burdens you so deeply?" The traveler looked up, his face etched with frustration. "Master," he said, "I have been carrying this sack for so long. It holds everything I own, but the weight of it is unbearable. Yet, I cannot put it down, for it contains all that I need to survive." The Buddha sat beside him and gestured toward the sack. "May I see what you carry?" Reluctantly, the traveler opened the sack. Inside were various items, some useful, like food and tools, but many others were broken, worn-out trinkets, and scraps of little value. The Buddha picked up a cracked clay pot from the sack. "Why do you carry this?" he asked. The traveler hesitated. "It belonged to my father," he said. "I cannot bear to part with it, even though it no longer holds water." The Buddha smiled gently. "Your love for your father is admirable. But tell me, does carrying this broken pot ease your journey, or does it make it harder?" The traveler lowered his gaze. "It makes it harder," he admitted. The Buddha set the pot aside and reached for another item, a rusted tool with a broken handle. "And this?" the Buddha asked. "Why do you carry it?" The traveler shrugged. "It was once useful to me, but now it is of no use. I carry it only because I always have." The Buddha placed the tool next to the pot and looked at the traveler kindly. "We often carry things in our minds, and our hearts the same way you carry these objects. Old regrets, fears, and attachments. We hold on to them long after they have ceased to serve us. Yet we wonder why the journey feels so difficult." The traveler's eyes widened with realization. "But Master, how do I let go of what I have carried for so long?" The Buddha stood and pointed to a nearby stream. "Come with me," he said. At the edge of the stream, the Buddha gestured for the traveler to kneel beside him. "Feel the coolness of the water," the Buddha said, dipping his hands into the stream. "This stream flows effortlessly, carrying away all that does not belong. You, too, can let go. Close your eyes and imagine placing each burden into the water. Release it and watch it drift away." The traveler closed his eyes, following the Buddha's guidance. In his mind, he placed the broken pot into the stream, then the rusted tool, and finally the memories and fears he had clung to for so long. As he imagined these burdens floating away, he felt a lightness in his heart that he had not known in years. When he opened his eyes, the Buddha smiled. Letting go does not mean losing what matters. but freeing yourself from what holds you back. Carry only what nourishes your journey, and you will find peace." The traveler stood, his body and spirit lighter. "Thank you, Master," he said, bowing deeply. "I will remember this lesson." Closing message. The burdens we carry are often of our own making. Let go of what no longer serves you, and discover the freedom to walk your path with ease. The power of presence. True freedom is found not in escaping the present moment, but in fully embracing it. The unseen treasure. One day, a wealthy merchant approached the Buddha in search of guidance. Despite his riches, his heart was heavy with dissatisfaction. He had spent years accumulating wealth, yet peace eluded him. "Master," the merchant said, bowing deeply, "I have everything a man could desire: gold, land, servants, and possessions. Yet, I feel empty. What am I missing?" The Buddha gazed at the man with a calm smile and said, "Let me tell you a story. In a distant village, there was a farmer who lived a simple life. He owned a modest house, a small plot of land, and a single cow that provided milk for his family. Despite his humble means, the farmer was content. He woke each morning with gratitude for what he had and worked diligently in his fields. One day, a passing traveler stopped at the farmer's home, seeking shelter for the night. The farmer welcomed him warmly, sharing his modest meal and offering a bed. As they sat under the stars, the traveler spoke of a legendary treasure buried deep in the forest. "It is said to be vast beyond imagination," the traveler said. "Whoever finds it will never want for anything again." The farmer's curiosity was piqued. That night, he lay awake, imagining the treasure and all it could bring him. By morning, his thoughts had consumed him. He decided to leave his fields and search for the treasure. The farmer journeyed into the forest, guided only by the traveler's vague description. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. He dug and searched, but the treasure remained elusive. His hands grew calloused, his body weary. His thoughts, once filled with hope, turned to frustration and despair. He missed his home, his family, and the simplicity of his old life. But he was too consumed by his quest to return. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the farmer sat beneath a tree, defeated. Tears streamed down his face as he whispered, "I have lost everything for something I cannot even find." At that moment, an elderly hermit appeared, carrying a small lantern. "Why do you cry, my friend?" the hermit asked. The farmer poured out his heart, recounting his journey and his losses. When he finished, the hermit placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "You seek a treasure far away, yet you do not see the one you already have." The farmer looked confused. "What do you mean?" "Return to your home," the hermit said simply. "There you will find what you seek." The farmer, though skeptical, decided to follow the hermit's advice. He returned to his village, his home, and his fields. As he stepped through the doorway of his house, he was greeted by his family's smiles and the warmth of familiarity. His wife prepared a simple meal, and his children laughed and played. Sitting at the table, the farmer suddenly realized what the hermit had meant. His treasure was not buried in the forest. It had been with him all along, in the love of his family, the satisfaction of honest work, and the beauty of each moment. The Buddha paused, his eyes meeting the merchant's. "Like the farmer, you have spent your life seeking fulfillment outside yourself," the Buddha said. "But the true treasure lies not in what you possess, but in how you perceive the present moment." The merchant, humbled, bowed again. "Master, how can I learn to see this treasure?" "Begin by observing your breath," the Buddha replied. "Each inhale, each exhale, reminds you of life's simplicity. Focus on the sensations of the present, and you will find the peace you seek." Closing message. The treasures we seek are often closer than we realize. By embracing the present, we uncover the infinite wealth within ourselves. The gift of patience. In patience, there is peace. In rushing, there is suffering. Learn to flow with the rhythm of life. The slow boiling pot. In a small village surrounded by lush green hills, there lived a young monk named Rahula. Rahula was known for his enthusiasm and dedication to his studies, but he often grew frustrated with the slow pace of his progress. One day, Rahula approached the Buddha, his face clouded with impatience. "Master," he said, bowing deeply, "I study and meditate as you have taught, yet I feel no closer to enlightenment. Why does it take so long?" The Buddha looked at him with a gentle smile and replied, "Let us go for a walk, Rahula." The Buddha led Rahula to the monastery kitchen, where a pot of water sat on a stone stove. The fire beneath it flickered steadily, warming the pot. "Rahula," the Buddha said, pointing to the pot, "what do you see?" Rahula answered, "A pot of water, Master." "And what is its purpose?" the Buddha asked. "To boil, Master," Rahula replied confidently. The light of forgiveness. Forgiveness is not for the one who wronged you. It is for the freedom of your own heart. The weight of the stone. In the quiet town of Kapilavastu, a young man named Devdatta carried a heavy heart. For years, he had held on to anger toward an old friend who had betrayed him. Though life had moved on, the bitterness stayed with him, like a shadow that never left his side. One day, Devdatta heard that the Buddha was teaching in a nearby village. Seeking solace, he decided to visit the great teacher and seek answers for his suffering. When he arrived, he bowed before the Buddha and said, "Master, I cannot find peace. Every time I remember what my friend did to me, the anger flares up again. I cannot forgive him." The Buddha listened quietly, his gaze steady and compassionate. After a moment, he said, "Come, Devdatta, let us take a walk." The Buddha led Devdatta to the edge of a river, where smooth stones lay scattered along the bank. Picking up a large stone, the Buddha handed it to Devdatta. "Hold this stone," the Buddha said, "and follow me." They began to walk along the riverbank. At first, the weight of the stone seemed manageable, and Devdatta held it tightly. But as they walked, the stone grew heavier in his hands. His arms ached, and sweat beaded on his forehead. "Master," Devdatta said, his voice strained, "this stone is too heavy. I cannot carry it much longer." The Buddha stopped and turned to him. "If it is so heavy, Devdatta, why do you not let it go?" Devdatta stared at the stone in his hands, realization dawning in his eyes. "But Master," he said hesitantly, "what if letting it go means I lose something important? What if it means I have been weak?" The Buddha smiled gently. "Does holding onto the stone make you strong, or does it simply cause you pain? Forgiveness is like setting down this stone. It is not for the benefit of the other person. It is for your own freedom." The Buddha then told a story to illustrate his point. Long ago, there was a king who ruled a prosperous land. One day, an enemy nation attacked, stealing many treasures from the royal palace. The king was furious and vowed revenge. For years, he plotted and schemed, devoting all his time and energy to his vengeance. But while he focused on his hatred, his kingdom began to wither. His crops failed, his people suffered, and his once thriving land became barren. Finally, an old advisor approached him and said, "My king, your anger has cost you more than your enemy ever could. The treasure they stole is gone, but your kingdom is what you are losing now." The king realized the truth in the advisor's words. That day, he let go of his hatred and turned his attention back to his people. With time, his kingdom flourished once more. The Buddha looked at Devdatta. "Do you see? Clinging to anger harms no one but yourself. When you let go, you create space for peace and healing." Devdatta stood silently for a long moment. Then, with trembling hands, he released the stone into the river. He watched as the water carried it away, its ripples spreading outward until they disappeared. The heaviness in his heart began to lift. "Thank you, Master," Devdatta said softly. "I understand now. Forgiveness is not for them. It is for me." The Buddha nodded. "Yes, Devdatta, forgiveness is the key that unlocks the chains we place on our own hearts. By letting go, you free yourself to walk the path of peace." Closing message. Anger is a stone we carry, heavy and unyielding. Forgiveness is the act of setting it down. allowing our hearts to feel light again. The strength of kindness. True strength is not in overpowering others, but in choosing kindness even when faced with hostility. The man who spat at the Buddha. One morning, as the Buddha was teaching in a bustling village, a man approached him with anger burning in his eyes. The man had heard of the Buddha's growing influence and felt threatened by his teachings. Without a word, the man spat on the Buddha's face. The crowd gasped in shock, some stepping forward to confront the man, but the Buddha remained calm. He wiped his face with the edge of his robe and looked at the man with eyes full of compassion. "What else?" the Buddha asked gently. The man was stunned. He had expected outrage or retaliation, but instead, he saw only kindness. Confused and overwhelmed, he stormed away without another word. That night, the man could not sleep. The Buddha's calm demeanor haunted him. He had insulted a teacher in front of a crowd, yet instead of anger, he had been met with compassion. The next morning, the man returned to the same spot, where the Buddha was teaching. This time, his face was pale with guilt. He knelt before the Buddha and said, "Master, I am sorry for what I did yesterday. My actions were shameful." The Buddha smiled. "Stand, my friend. You have nothing to apologize for." The man looked confused. "But I spat on you. Master, I disrespected you in front of everyone. How can you say I owe no apology?" The Buddha replied, "The man who spat at me yesterday is not the same man who stands before me today. Yesterday, you were filled with anger. Today, you are filled with remorse. I do not hold on to the actions of a man who no longer exists." The Buddha then turned to the crowd and shared a lesson. "Imagine someone offers you a gift," he said. "If you refuse to accept it, to whom does the gift belong?" "To the one who offered it," someone replied. The Buddha nodded. "The same is true of anger. When someone directs anger toward you, and you do not accept it, it remains with them. By choosing kindness, you free yourself from the burden of their anger." The man listened intently, his heart swelling with gratitude. He bowed deeply and said, "Master, you have shown me the power of kindness. I will strive to follow your example." From that day forward, the man became one of the Buddha's most devoted disciples. He learned that strength does not lie in reacting to others' hostility, but in maintaining peace within oneself. Closing message: kindness is the greatest strength. It transforms anger into understanding and hostility into harmony. The echo of gratitude. A grateful heart turns every moment into a blessing, while an ungrateful one overlooks the treasures it already holds. The ungrateful farmer. In a village nestled at the edge of a vast forest, there lived a farmer named Keshava. Keshava was known for his hard work, but he was also known for his complaints. He often grumbled about his small harvests, the fickle weather, and the lack of help from his neighbors. "No one has a life as difficult as mine," he would say, shaking his fist at the sky. "Why is fate so cruel to me?" One day, Keshava heard that the Buddha was passing through the nearby town. Though he had little interest in spiritual teachings, his curiosity was piqued by the tales of the Buddha's wisdom. He decided to seek the Buddha's guidance, hoping for a solution to his never-ending troubles. When Keshava arrived, he found the Buddha sitting under a great banyan tree, surrounded by villagers eager to hear his teachings. Patiently, Keshava waited until the crowd had dispersed. "Master," Keshava said, bowing respectfully, "I am a simple farmer, but my life is filled with hardship. My fields yield little, my labor is endless, and my neighbors offer no support. What must I do to escape this suffering?" The Buddha listened quietly, his gaze calm and steady. After a moment, he said, "Keshava, let us take a walk together." The Buddha led Keshava to a nearby river, its waters flowing clear and steady. They sat by the riverbank, and the Buddha asked, "Tell me, Keshava, what do you see here?" "I see water, Master," Keshava replied. "And what does the river do?" the Buddha asked. "It flows," Keshava said. "It nourishes the land and sustains life." The Buddha nodded. "Indeed. Now, let me tell you a story. Once, There was a man who wandered into a valley, rich with fruit trees, fresh streams, and wildflowers. He marveled at its beauty and abundance, for it was unlike anything he had seen before. The man spent his days eating the fruit, drinking from the streams, and resting under the shade of the trees. But soon, he began to take the valley's gifts for granted. "This fruit is too sweet," he complained one day. "The water is too cold. The sun is too bright." Over time, his dissatisfaction grew. He stopped enjoying the valley's beauty and began to long for what he did not have. Then, one day, a great storm swept through the valley, leaving it barren. The fruit trees were uprooted, the streams dried up, and the flowers wilted. The man, now faced with emptiness, realized what he had lost. The Buddha paused and turned to Keshava. "Do you see, my friend? Gratitude is the key to contentment. When you fail to appreciate what you have, you lose the joy of the present moment. Like the man in the story, you may not realize the value of your blessings until they are gone." Keshava frowned, deep in thought. "But Master," he said, "how can I feel gratitude when my life is so difficult? The rain does not always come. My crops are meager, and my neighbors are indifferent to my struggles." The Buddha gestured to the river. "This river flows endlessly, without complaint. It gives life to the land, yet it asks for nothing in return. Be like the river. Keshava, do your work with sincerity, and let go of your attachment to the results. Look around you, your fields, your family, the very breath you take. These are gifts, if only you choose to see them." The Buddha then reached into the soil by the riverbank and held up a small seed. "Plant this in your heart, Keshava. It is the seed of gratitude. With each moment you recognize as a blessing, this seed will grow, and your heart will be filled with joy." For the first time, Keshava felt a glimmer of understanding. He bowed deeply and said, "Master, I see now that I have been blind to the blessings in my life. I will strive to nurture this seed of gratitude." When Keshava returned to his village, he began to change. He greeted his neighbors with kindness, worked his fields with renewed dedication, and thanked the heavens for each drop of rain. Though his circumstances remained the same, his heart grew lighter, and his days became brighter. Years later, when Keshava's fields flourished beyond his wildest dreams, he often returned to the riverbank to reflect on the Buddha's lesson. He would sit quietly, listening to the water's gentle flow, and whisper to himself, "Thank you." Closing message. Gratitude is the seed of happiness. When you nurture it, life blooms with endless joy and peace. The mirror of truth. The truth is not something to be feared. It is a mirror that reveals the path to freedom. The dusty mirror. In a bustling city at the crossroads of trade routes, there lived a wealthy merchant named Samudra, known for his vast riches and sharp intellect. Samudra prided himself on his ability to outsmart others and avoid mistakes. But despite his success, he carried an unshakable fear, the fear of being wrong. One day, news spread that the Buddha was visiting the city. Intrigued by tales of the Buddha's wisdom, Samudra decided to meet him, though not with an open heart. "I will test this so-called enlightened one," he thought, "and see if his wisdom can match mine." When Samudra arrived at the gathering, the Buddha was speaking to a crowd about the importance of self-reflection. "The mind," the Buddha said, "is like a mirror. If it is covered in dust, it cannot reflect the truth. Only by clearing the dust can we see ourselves as we truly are." Samudra stepped forward, his voice loud and confident. "Master," he said, "I have no need to clear any dust from my mirror. I am already a successful man. What could your teachings offer someone like me?" The Buddha looked at Samudra with calm eyes and said, "Come with me, my friend, and I will show you." The Buddha led Samudra to a quiet corner of the city, where an old, neglected mirror hung on a wall. Its surface was so covered in dust and grime that it reflected nothing. "What do you see, Samudra?" the Buddha asked, gesturing toward the mirror. "Nothing," Samudra replied. "The mirror is filthy. It cannot reflect anything." The Buddha handed him a cloth. "Clean it," he said. Samudra hesitated, but began to wipe the mirror. As the dust fell away, the surface grew clearer, and his own reflection began to emerge. The Buddha spoke, "This mirror is like your mind, samudra, covered by pride, fear, and ignorance. It cannot reflect the truth, but with effort and humility, you can clear away the dust and see yourself as you truly are." Samudra frowned. "But Master, what if I do not like what I see in the mirror? What if the truth reveals my flaws and mistakes?" The Buddha smiled gently. "Avoiding the truth does not make it disappear. The flaws and mistakes you fear are like shadows. They exist only because you have turned away from the light. By facing the truth, you do not create imperfections. You merely bring them into view, where they can be understood and transformed." The Buddha then shared a story to illustrate his point. There was once a prince who wore a golden mask. The mask was so beautiful that everyone praised him for his appearance. Over time, the prince began to believe that the mask was his true face. Years passed, and the prince never removed the mask, even in private. One day, an old advisor suggested he take it off, saying, "Your true face is far more handsome than this mask." But the prince refused, fearing what he might find beneath. He had worn the mask for so long that he had forgotten what he truly looked like. Finally, the prince summoned the courage to remove it. At first, he was shocked to see imperfections, a scar from his childhood, lines of age that the mask had hidden. But as he gazed longer, he realized that his true face held a beauty far deeper than the mask ever could. It was a beauty born of truth and self-acceptance. Samudra listened intently, his pride softening with each word. "Master," he said quietly, "I understand now. My fear of the truth has blinded me to who I truly am. But how do I begin to clear the dust from my mirror?" The Buddha placed a hand on Samudra's shoulder. "Begin with mindfulness. Observe your thoughts and actions without judgment. Acknowledge your mistakes, but do not cling to them. Each moment of honesty is a stroke of the cloth, clearing away the dust and revealing the light within." Samudra bowed deeply. "Thank you, Master. I will strive to face the truth with courage and humility." From that day forward, Samudra became a different man. He no longer sought to prove himself to others, but focused instead on understanding himself. Though the journey was challenging, he found that each layer of dust he removed brought him closer to peace and clarity. Closing message: the truth is a mirror that reveals both our flaws and our beauty. By clearing the dust of pride and fear, we discover the light of our true selves. The weight of expectations. Freedom lies not in achieving every desire, but in releasing the expectations that bind us. The empty jar. In a quiet village surrounded by lush green hills, there lived a young potter named Sanvi. She was known for her beautiful jars, crafted with precision and care. Her work was admired by everyone in the village, and people traveled far to purchase her creations. But as her fame grew, so did her burden. Sanvi began to feel the pressure of meeting everyone's expectations. She feared that a single imperfect jar would ruin her reputation. Over time, her work no longer brought her joy, only anxiety. One day, while delivering a batch of jars to a wealthy merchant, Sanvi overheard a group of villagers talking about the Buddha, who had arrived in a nearby town. Intrigued by his teachings, she decided to visit him and seek guidance. When Sanvi reached the Buddha, she found him sitting under a tree, surrounded by a group of listeners. She waited patiently until the crowd dispersed, then approached him with a deep bow. "Master," she said, "I am trapped by the weight of expectations. Everyone praises my work, yet I live in constant fear of failure. I no longer create from my heart, but from my fear of disappointing others. What can I do to free myself?" The Buddha gazed at her with kind eyes and said, "Sanvi, let me show you something. Come with me." The Buddha led Sanvi to a well at the edge of the village. Beside the well stood an old, empty jar, its surface cracked and worn. "What do you see, Sanvi?" the Buddha asked, pointing to the jar. "It is an old jar, Master," she replied. "It is empty and useless now." The Buddha smiled. "And yet, this jar once served its purpose. holding water for the villagers. Though it is cracked and empty, does it no longer hold value? Can it not still remind us of its service? Sambi hesitated. I suppose it does, Master, but it is broken now. What use could it possibly have? The Buddha picked up the jar and placed it beneath the well spout. As he turned the handle, water flowed into the jar, filling it despite its cracks. Some of the water leaked out, yet much of it remained. Do you see, Sanvi? The Buddha said. Even a cracked jar can hold water. Its imperfections do not take away its ability to serve. Sanvi watched the jar intently, her mind racing with thoughts. But Master, she said, I fear that if I create something imperfect, others will reject it. How can I let go of that fear? The Buddha sat beside her and spoke gently. Expectations, like this jar, are vessels. When you create from fear, you fill your jar with anxiety and doubt. And no matter how beautiful it appears, it cannot bring you peace. But when you create from your heart, free of expectation, your jar overflows with joy, regardless of how others perceive it. The Buddha then told her a story to illustrate his lesson. There was once a musician who played the most enchanting melodies. People would gather from far and wide to listen to him, and he took great pride in their applause. One day, while walking in the forest, he came upon an old blind man sitting by the roadside. The blind man asked, "What do you carry in your hands?" "My lute," the musician replied. "I play songs that bring joy to many." The blind man smiled. "Play something for me." The musician hesitated, for he had never played for someone who could not see his movements or praise his skill. But reluctantly, he began to play. As the music filled the air, the blind man listened intently, swaying with the rhythm. When the song ended, the blind man said, "Your music is a gift, not because I can see your hands or applaud you, but because it touches my soul." At that moment, the musician realized that the value of his music did not lie in others' approval, but in the act of creating itself. The Buddha turned to Sanvi. Like the musician, you must let go of your need for others' praise. Create not to meet expectations, but to honor the gift within you. When you do this, your work will become a source of peace, both for you and for others. Sanvi sat silently for a long moment, the weight in her heart slowly lifting. "Thank you, Master," she said. "I see now that I have been filling my jar with the wrong water. From now on, I will create not out of fear, but out of love." The Buddha smiled. "Remember, Sanvi, even a cracked jar can hold life-giving water. Your worth does not lie in perfection, but in your willingness to serve." When Sanvi returned to her village, she began to work with a renewed sense of purpose. Her jars, though not always flawless, were filled with the spirit of her heart. People admired her creations even more, for they carried the warmth of her joy. Years later, as she reflected on her journey, she often thought of the Buddha and the old jar by the well. Whenever fear crept into her mind, she would whisper to herself, "Even a cracked jar can hold water." Closing message: the weight of expectations can crack even the strongest vessel. Release them, and let your heart fill your jar with joy. The courage to begin again. The greatest strength lies not in never falling, but in rising each time we fall. The broken cart. In the shadow of a great mountain, there lived a young merchant named Arun. Arun had dreams of building a prosperous trade route, one that would bring goods and wealth to his village. He worked tirelessly, saving every coin, to buy a cart and 2 sturdy oxen to carry his goods. Finally, the day came when his dream seemed within reach. Arun loaded his cart with goods and set out on his first journey, his heart filled with hope. But fate had other plans. As Arun made his way through the rocky mountain pass, the wheel of his cart hit a sharp stone and splintered. The cart toppled, spilling its contents across the path. One of the oxen stumbled and injured its leg, making it impossible to continue. Arun sat by the broken cart, his head in his hands. Weeks of preparation and months of savings were now reduced to a pile of scattered goods. He felt anger, despair, and a deep sense of failure. "Why did this happen to me?" he cried out to the empty mountains. "I worked so hard, yet everything is ruined. What's the point of trying if failure is all that awaits?" A kind traveler passing through the mountains saw Arun sitting by his broken cart and stopped to help. Together, they gathered the scattered goods and moved the injured ox to the side of the path. "Why do you sit here, young man?" the traveler asked. "There's no use continuing," Arun replied bitterly. "I've lost everything. This journey was my only chance, and now it's over." The traveler smiled gently. "Let me tell you a story," he said. "Many years ago, there was a young boy who dreamed of climbing the highest peak in these mountains. Day after day, he practiced climbing the smaller hills, preparing himself for the great ascent. One morning, he set out to conquer the tallest peak. He climbed higher and higher, but as he neared the summit, a sudden storm rolled in. The wind howled, the rain poured, and the boy lost his footing, tumbling down the slope. When he reached the base of the mountain, bruised and defeated, he sat there, much like you are now, and asked, "Why did I even try?" An old shepherd passing by heard his lament and said, "Young one, the mountain has not defeated you. It has simply tested your resolve. Rest now, and when the storm passes, climb again. Each step will make you stronger, and one day, you will reach the summit." The boy listened, and though he was afraid, he rose the next morning and began his climb again. Over time, he learned to navigate the mountain's challenges, and when he finally reached the summit, he realized that the climb itself had made him stronger than he ever imagined. The traveler turned to Arun. "Your journey is like that boy's climb. The broken cart is not the end. It is a test of your resolve. Will you let this setback define you, or will you rise and try again?" Arun sat silently, the traveler's words sinking into his heart. He looked at his broken cart and injured ox with fresh eyes. "But how can I continue with no cart and no ox to pull it?" he asked. The traveler handed Arun a sturdy stick. "Begin by carrying what you can," he said. "Each step forward is a step closer to rebuilding. The mountain will teach you as you go." Arun decided to take the traveler's advice. He loaded what goods he could onto his back and began walking. Though the burden was heavy and the journey slow, each step filled him with a renewed sense of purpose. When Arun returned to his village, he told his neighbors of his experience. Inspired by his determination, they came together to help him repair his cart and care for his injured ox. In time, Arun's trade route flourished. He faced many challenges along the way, but each time he fell, he rose again, stronger and wiser. Years later, as an elder, Arun often shared the story of his first journey with young traders. "The broken cart," he would say, "was my greatest teacher. It taught me that failure is not the end, but the beginning of a new path." Closing message: when your cart breaks and your journey halts, remember, every setback is a chance to rise, to learn, and to begin again. Life is a journey filled with lessons, challenges, and moments of transformation. Through the stories we've shared, one truth becomes clear: happiness, peace, and growth are not found in chasing the past or fearing the future. They are found in embracing the present moment, in letting go of what no longer serves us, and in cultivating gratitude for what we already have. As we conclude, let these stories be more than just words. Let them inspire you to pause, to reflect, and to carry their wisdom into your own life. Ask yourself, what burdens am I carrying that I can release? What gifts of the present am I overlooking? And how can I move forward with courage, kindness, and gratitude? The Buddhist teachings remind us, the past has passed. The future is yet to come. Only the present is in your hands. What you do now shapes everything that lies ahead. So, as you step away from this video, take a deep breath, be here, and begin again. Thank you for watching, and may your journey be one of peace, growth, and boundless joy.